There's been a gap in 1916 commemoration, partly because people were terrified of giving the IRA any legitimacy during the Northern Ireland Troubles, and it's fortunate that that period is hopefully definitively behind us, because it has allowed people to be more open. I was born in Dublin in 1948, so I was 18 years old in 1966. And sometimes when you hear David McWilliams coming out with his nice glib turns of phrase, I think that the best way to describe my age cohort would be Generation Misha-era. And the phrase Generation Misha-era actually came to me only a couple of months ago. I was with some former colleagues who had retired from the civil service around the same time as I had. And I made the comment that we didn't join the Irish Civil Service for money. There was a steady job. You knew you weren't going to be rich, but there was a genuine sense of what I would call practical patriotism. You worked for your country instead of dying for it. And I think that would have been part of my what I drew from the ferment of patriotism that was generated around 1966. Retrospectively, people have tried to blame the Northern Ireland Troubles and the rise of the IRA on the 1966 commemoration. I think that is a totally ahistoric calumny. Okay, it was quite celebratory, but so too was the American bicentennial of their bloody war against the British. And let's not even revisit the French Revolution. Nobody apologises much for the terror. So 1966 commemoration was, if you like, patriotic, not excessively nationalistic. At that time, people generally still did have a good level of Irish, so quite a lot of the events were in Irish. One of the events that I took part in 1966 was the Tomás McConaughey's pageant in Croke Park, and I took a certain pride in that. I joined the FCA, I'd say probably motivated as much by British jingoism as by Patrick Pearse, because when we were boys we read Beatles and all the rest of it, and the English war comics, before football invaded the narrative, what did Daddy do in the war was the main fiction fodder for young schoolboys in the 50s and early 60s. So like most people of my age cohort, I joined the FCA, and I joined a cavalry unit in McKee Barracks beside Phoenix Park. It had been the Marlborough Barracks in the British era, and then became McKee Barracks. And from there we went for rehearsals several times a week to Croke Park, and we had a part in that as extras, and we were quite honoured to have three roles. We represented in living tableau, we represented the American War of Independence, 1798, and the thing that we found most honouring, we represented the modern day FCA, so we marched on the grand finale in our FCA uniforms. I'd chosen to join the unit I did join because I wanted to meet people from a different social background, so I didn't join Cumta an Fiarsaigh, much to my mother's dismay. Instead I joined a cavalry unit which did have an Irish-speaking troop, which is platoon size. And I joined that in the hope of keeping my Irish alive while when I left school, but in practice the training wasn't in Irish, so it gradually decayed. But at one stage we were assessed by Army headquarters, and we were all given the right to wear the Army G, which was an Army-specific brass Irish letter G to show that you wear a Gaeilgeoir. And I still have the Army G. I used to wear it as a lapel pin on my civilian attire, which is strictly illegal, but it did represent a certain commitment to some values. I'm struck by the 2016 commemorations, by the change of emphasis, and it is quite a healthy and positive development. The women having been written out of history, are finally being written back in. Their law has chuckied. the fiction rebellion, which some people may comment on here, has been derided by some and lauded by others, but the role of the women has clearly been brought back to the fore, and they certainly were in the citizen army in particular. They were treated as peers. They did weapons training. A lot of them resented in the GPO and elsewhere being relegated to the kitchens and the field hospitals, but it's quite clear that some of the fictionalised characters, while not directly historical, do represent a strand of very important women in the Rising. And it's good that their time has come. I think it has to be seen in the context of the Decade of Commemoration, which was a very healthy way to approach the whole topic. I was just thinking in yesterday's session, there was mention of the Connaught Rangers, and certainly in my time in the Irish Defence Forces, even only as a part-time member, and I would have shared this worldview, the only British regiment that was commemorated was the Connaught Rangers, and that was because they had mutinied in India. The other regiments just weren't spoken about. Now, just a couple of months ago, I went to one of the Trinity Long Room Hub talks on Irish UN operations in Cyprus, and a retired Army Commandant talked about the fact that they had had an excellent relationship with the Royal Irish Rangers who were in Cyprus at the same time. That relationship was soured by the behaviour of the British Parachute Regiment in Belfast and Derry subsequently, but I think that there has been obviously a certain amount of airbrushing. I mean, certainly when Collins took over as Minister for Defence and effectively Chief of Staff of the Army, the new Army, he was keen to get a lot of Irish ex-British Army regulars in to have a professional army for the state. But that kind of affiliation was broken. Oddly enough, some of the remnants of it I would have found in even in my time in the 1960s and 70s. The kind of if you like soldier slang that we used came from the British Army. If a guy was smartly turned out, if he had his buttons polished, his trousers well creased, he was jildi, which is an Indian word. And there are a few words like that. A piece of paper was a chit, which is another Hindu word as far as I know, Hindi word. So you do have these vestiges of the British regular army tradition, but it's really only in the last couple of years that we've begun to open up our hearts, and obviously it has a lot to do with Mary Robinson, the Messine Commemoration Park, and the whole work around reconciliation in Northern Ireland. I think that there's been a gap in 1916 commemoration, partly because people were terrified of giving the IRA any legitimacy during the Northern Ireland Troubles. And it's fortunate that period is hopefully definitively behind us, because it has allowed people to be more open. And I've certainly, when I lived in Belgium for 22 years, and I went on several tours around the Commonwealth war graves on the Western Front, and I had a great interest in looking at the tombstones of British, of Australian, of American, Canadian, New Zealand war dead as of the Irish. And I think that has been something which, if Northern Unionists can find their way to us, there is hope for a meeting of minds, what the French would call a paix des braves, a peace between mutually respecting warriors.